The Galactic Council was in chaos. For centuries, they had ruled over thousands of worlds. They controlled trade, maintained peace, and ensured that no species grew too powerful. But now their empire was crumbling. Civilizations were at war. Star systems were falling into anarchy. And worst of all, the ones who could save them, humans, had already walked away. Grand Chancellor Varric stood in the council hall, staring at the holographic display in front of him. Reports from across the galaxy showed destruction, rebellion, and war. The once mighty empire of the council was on the edge of collapse. "We need them," Varric said, his voice trembling. The other council members, high-ranking officials from different species, exchanged nervous glances. "You cannot be serious," growled General Xaran, a reptilian war leader. "The humans abandoned us. They left the galaxy to rot. And yet, without them, we are the ones rotting," replied Varric. There was silence. No one wanted to admit the truth, but it was undeniable. When humans were part of the Galactic Council, everything worked. They had the strongest fleets, the best technology, and the sharpest minds. But the Council had never treated them as equals. Decades ago, humans had made a final demand. To be recognized as a leading power, the Council had refused. Humans had warned them, "One day, you will regret this." And then they left. Their fleets vanished, their colonies went silent, and their trade routes closed. No one knew where they had gone. Now, with the galaxy in flames, the Council needed them more than ever. Varric turned to a small, green-skinned diplomat named Orlan. "Send a message to the humans," he ordered. "Tell them the Council is requesting their return." Orlan hesitated. "Do you think they'll answer?" Varric's expression darkened. "They have to." Deep in space, on a hidden human colony, Admiral Sarah Locke leaned back in her chair, watching the encrypted message on her screen. It was from the Galactic Council. As soon as she read the request, she let out a cold laugh. "They're finally begging," she muttered. Beside her, an AI assistant projected the galactic map. "Current data suggests the Council is experiencing severe instability. Multiple factions have risen. Their military forces are losing control." Sarah tapped her fingers on the desk. "And now they want us back to fix their mess." She stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the skies were filled with powerful human warships, larger and stronger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. "Let them suffer a little longer," she said with a smirk. "Maybe then they'll understand what they lost." The Galactic Council's urgent message had been sent. Now, all they could do was wait. Grand Chancellor Varric sat in his chamber, his claws tapping anxiously against the polished table. Hours had passed since the transmission was sent to the last known human outposts. The silence was unbearable. "Why haven't they responded?" asked Orlan, his voice filled with frustration. "Surely they received our message." Varric let out a deep sigh. "They received it. They're choosing not to answer." Across the room, General Xaran growled. "This is pointless. We should prepare our fleets. If the humans won't return, we'll take what we need from them." A nervous murmur spread through the council members. The idea of attacking the humans had been discussed before, many times, in secret meetings, behind closed doors. But no one had ever dared to act on it. "Are you insane?" snapped Ambassador Lyrian, a frail but wise elder from the Fortian species. "We have no idea what the humans are capable of now. They disappeared for decades. What if they have weapons we can't even comprehend?" Kazarin crossed his arms. "And what if they don't? What if they're weak? We feared them for too long." Varric shook his head. "No. If we make them our enemy, it will be the last mistake we ever make." Silence fell upon the room. The council knew the truth. Humans had never been weak. Even before they left, their technology was advancing faster than anyone had thought possible. If they had continued to evolve in secret, then the galaxy might not be ready for what they had become. Just as the tension in the chamber reached its peak, A soft beep echoed through the hall. Orlin gasped, staring at the holographic display. Incoming transmission. The room fell deathly silent. Every official, every diplomat, every soldier held their breath as the screen flickered to life. For the first time in decades, humanity had answered. Deep in human territory, Admiral Sarah Locke stood before a massive screen, arms crossed as she watched the message from the Galactic Council, the desperate plea for help, the request for humanity to return. A smirk formed on her lips. "They're afraid," she said. Beside her, an officer nodded. "We expected this. Without us, their empire was bound to crumble." Sarah exhaled slowly. "And now they come crawling back. But do they deserve our help?" The room remained silent. The fleet of human warships outside hummed with power, waiting for the command that could change the fate of the galaxy. Sarah turned to the comm officer. "Send them a response." The officer hesitated. "And what should we say?" A slow, knowing smile spread across Sarah's face. "Nothing." The humans had received the message, but they would not respond. Not yet. Let the Council sweat a little longer. The Galactic Council chamber was filled with a tense silence. The message had been sent. The humans had received it. But there was no reply. Orlin stared at the holographic display, hoping for a delayed response. But the screen remained dark. "They're ignoring us," General Xeren growled, slamming his fist on the table. "They want us to suffer." Ambassador Lyrian shook his head. "No, General. This silence is a response in itself." Varric exhaled deeply, his long fingers pressing against his temple. "They're thinking, calculating." Across the galaxy, the news had begun to spread. The Council's plea for help. The humans' silence. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that the humans had abandoned their compassion, that they would let the galaxy rot for what had been done to them. Others feared that humanity had grown even stronger, so powerful that they no longer needed to answer to the Council. On the outer colonies, the fear was worse. Merchants, travelers, and smugglers spoke in hushed voices in the dark corners of space stations. "If the humans don't come back, we're finished," muttered an old trader, his three eyes darting around nervously. A young alien scoffed. "Maybe they're dead. Maybe they just don't care anymore." The old trader shook his head. "You don't understand. They're still out there. They've been watching." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "And when they return, it won't be like before." The station's lights flickered for a moment, and the silence in the bar grew heavy. Everyone knew the truth. The humans weren't answering. But they weren't gone. They were waiting. And when they finally moved, the galaxy would never be the same again. Meanwhile, in human territory, deep within the shadows of an uncharted system, Admiral Sarah Locke studied the reports coming in. The panic, the fears spreading across the Galactic Council's worlds. She smiled. "They're afraid of what we might do," she said, turning to her officers. "Good." One of the commanders stepped forward. "Ma'am, the Council is desperate. If they don't get a response soon, they might take action." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Do you think they'd be that foolish?" The commander hesitated. "Fear makes people do foolish things." Sarah leaned back, considering his words. Then, finally, she spoke. "Prepare the fleet." The time for silence was almost over. The humans would answer soon, and the galaxy would tremble. The Galactic Council chamber was no longer filled with the usual diplomatic debates. There was no talk of trade agreements, no political maneuvering. Instead, there was only one subject dominating every conversation: humanity's silence. Orlin stood at the center of the chamber, his voice strained with urgency. "We must assume the worst. Humanity's refusal to respond could mean only one thing. They are preparing." General Xeren crossed his arms, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "Preparing for what?" "For war," Varric said grimly, his voice barely above a whisper. A hush fell over the chamber. Even those who had mocked the idea of fearing humans now felt the weight of that possibility. Ambassador Lyrian exhaled, tapping his claws against the table. We made a mistake when we thought we could control them. Now we must ask ourselves, what will they do? A nervous murmur rippled through the chamber. The last war against humanity had been a mistake. A terrible, irreversible mistake. They wouldn't attack unprovoked, one council member muttered, though his voice lacked confidence. Orlan turned towards him. Do you really believe that? After what we did? After how we betrayed them? Silence. A new report flashed onto the main holographic display. The room turned its attention to the screen. A small fleet had gone missing near the human border. No distress signals. No wreckage. An officer reported. They just vanished. Panic spread through the chamber. Whispers turned into arguments. Fear turned into desperation. General Xeran slammed his fist on the table. We cannot afford to wait. If we hesitate, we will be at their mercy. At their mercy? Varric scoffed. We were at their mercy once before. And do you remember what happened? They showed us mercy. They spared us. A heavy silence fell. It was true. After the last war, the humans could have wiped them out. They had the power. They had the opportunity. But instead, they had walked away. And now, that mercy had turned into something far more terrifying. Indifference. Meanwhile, on the human flagship Eclipse, Admiral Sarah Locke stood on the bridge, watching the distant stars. Her officers awaited her orders. They're afraid, one of her commanders said. They should be, she replied. The council had made their bed. They had chosen their path. Now, humanity would decide their fate. She turned to her crew, her expression cold and unreadable. Move the fleet forward. The time for waiting was over. And the galaxy was about to learn what it truly meant to awaken a sleeping giant. The vastness of space was silent, but for the Galactic Council, silence had never felt so loud. Every species in the chamber sat in tense anticipation, their eyes glued to the holographic display. A new report had just arrived. Human fleet detected, the officer announced, his voice trembling. They are moving towards the border, and they are not responding to hails. Orlan clenched his jaw. How many ships? The officer hesitated. Thousands. A wave of shock spread through the chamber. Thousands? That was impossible. The last war had nearly drained humanity's resources. How had they built such a force? General Xeran growled, his scales darkening in frustration. We should mobilize our own fleets immediately. Ambassador Lyrian shook his head. And what good will that do? We don't even know their intentions. Varric exhaled deeply. We know exactly what their intentions are. They warned us. They walked away before. This time, they're not walking away. A deep unease settled over the council. Perhaps we can still negotiate, one council member suggested weakly. Negotiate, Orlan scoffed. We betrayed them. We insulted them. And when we had the chance to make things right, we chose arrogance instead. No one had an answer. Suddenly, a new signal appeared on the display. It wasn't a message. It wasn't a transmission. It was a countdown. The humans weren't coming to talk. Meanwhile, aboard the human dreadnought Eclipse, Admiral Sarah Locke stood at the command station, watching the Galactic Council's homeworld on the screen. They had crossed the border unchallenged. Not a single enemy fleet had dared to stop them. They know, her first officer muttered. They know they have no chance. She nodded. Good, but knowing won't save them. A junior officer hesitated before speaking. Admiral, do we give them a final warning? Sarah smirked. No, we already gave them their final warning. She turned toward the display, her voice calm and absolute. Begin Phase 1. Across the fleet, ships activated their systems. Weapons powered up. Engines roared to life. The galaxy had waited too long, hoping humanity would remain silent. That silence was about to be broken. The Galactic Council's homeworld had never known war. It had been the center of diplomacy, a place where treaties were signed and conflicts were resolved. But today, the skies above it darkened, not from natural storms, but from the massive fleet of human warships that had arrived in absolute silence. Aboard the Eclipse, Admiral Sarah Locke stood firm, her eyes locked on the countdown timer. 10 seconds to Phase 1, the AI announced. Her officers were tense, hands hovering over controls, waiting for her command. The galaxy had doubted humanity for too long. Now it would learn the truth. 5 seconds, the AI continued. On the planet below, sirens blared across the capital. The council members stood frozen in their chambers, staring at the holographic screens as thousands of human ships positioned themselves into attack formations. Orlan swallowed hard. They aren't responding to our transmissions. We have to act. How? Lyrian snapped. We have nothing that can stop them. The countdown hit 0. Fire, Admiral Locke ordered. A pulse wave shot out from the Eclipse, followed by a synchronized barrage from the entire fleet. But the humans were not here to destroy. At least, not yet. The first strike was a warning. Planetary shields flickered as they absorbed the shockwave. Military bases, shipyards, and defense stations were hit with pinpoint precision, rendered useless in seconds. Across the planet, all advanced technology shut down. Communications, weapons, power grids. The Galactic Council's homeworld had just been disarmed. Ambassador Lyrian collapsed into his seat, his face pale. They took out our entire planetary defense system without a single casualty. Orlan clenched his fists. This was not an attack. This was a message. Above them, Admiral Locke watched the results on her display. The planet is neutralized, ma'am, an officer reported. She nodded. Phase 2 begins now. From the human fleet, a single message was broadcasted across the entire planet. Surrender. This is your only chance. The Galactic Council had played their final card. Now, they were at humanity's mercy. Silence fell over the Galactic Council's homeworld. The once bustling capital, filled with diplomats and rulers, now stood still as humanity's ultimatum echoed through every communication device on the planet. Surrender. This is your only chance. Orlan, the head ambassador, stared at the message in disbelief. Their fleets had been wiped out. Their planetary defenses had been neutralized without a single human casualty. The galaxy's most powerful alliance had been reduced to nothing in mere hours. Lyrian turned to him, her voice shaking. We have to surrender. Orlan's pride burned. We are the Galactic Council. We cannot. The sky erupted in flames. The humans hadn't fired on the city, but their presence alone was enough to send the council members into panic. Massive warships blotted out the sun, their weapons locked onto strategic locations. The message was clear: resist, and there will be no mercy. Admiral Sarah Locke stood on the command deck of the Eclipse, watching the chaos unfold. The Galactic Council had once laughed at humanity, dismissing them as insignificant. Now, they cowered in fear. Madam Admiral, her officer reported, they're sending a response. Locke exhaled slowly. Put it through. A trembling voice came over the comms. We surrender. The Galactic Council yields to humanity. Locke exchanged glances with her officers. This war had never been about conquest. It had been about justice. The Council had betrayed Earth, forcing humanity into a war it never wanted. Now, they would face the consequences. She leaned toward the transmission. Then you will do exactly as we say. Across the galaxy, every species watched in horror. Humanity had been underestimated for too long. They had come in peace, but when war was forced upon them, they had responded with overwhelming power. And now, the Galactic Council belonged to them. Earth had spoken. The galaxy would never be the same again.